Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Wine. Welcome back to art class. This is our final week for our Matisse inspired collage where we are creating people and shapes inspired by the artist Henri Matisse. For this week's lesson, you will need your papers from last week. You will also need scissors and glue stick and some additional papers which I will get you in a moment. Before we start, let's take a quick review as far as what we've done already. So far, you should have a background sheet with two contrasting colors, and you've cut your background shapes into large squares or rectangles. Then, you selected either black or white to create contrast, and you created Matisse-inspired people. So what do we still have to add that we see in Matisse's work that we don't have yet? I see some small shapes in Matisse's work. And that is our last step today. Today we're going to be looking at what we need to do to add these extra shapes. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to select one color to create contrast. So here I have my bin of colors. And remember, whatever color I choose, I want to make sure that that color has contrast with the colors I've already used in my collage. Contrast means it's really, really different. So I definitely don't want any oranges. I don't want any purples because I've already used purple. Whoops. I want to be careful about using another light color because that's not going to give me enough contrast. And I want to be careful about using a color that's very, very dark because that's not going to give me enough contrast. Oh my goodness. I don't have any green in here, and green is kind of a nice medium value. So maybe I could try holding up a few different greens and seeing which one I think looks the most different from what I already have. I think I like this dark green. I think it creates the most contrast with the colors I already have. So dark green is going to be the color that I choose today. Then the other thing I have to think about is what kind of shapes does Matisse use when he's creating all of these small extra shapes? If you think back to when we first started this project, we read the story about Matisse and how he cut a small bird and pinned it to his wall. We also looked at pictures where Matisse used shapes that look like leaves and flowers, and he created an entire garden. Remember, those weird wiggly shapes that do not have a name are called organic shapes. And remember, we practiced using both the positive shape or the inside shape and the negative shape or the outside shape. So that's what I want to do today in my artwork. I'm going to take my contrasting color and I'm going to think about one kind of weird wiggly shape that I could create over and over and over again. And because I know that it's important that I keep those negative shapes, one thing I like to do when I start is I'm going to take my rectangle piece of paper and I'm going to cut it into about 4 or 6 different rectangles. I can start by holding it the long way and just cutting that paper in half. That gives me 2 rectangles. Then I can turn it this way and I can either cut it in half one time, that will give me 4 shapes, or I could cut it twice. So either in half one time, or if I want my shapes to be a little smaller, I could cut a square here and cut another square there. That gives me a lot of different shapes to work with. And then I want to think about one of the organic shapes. Maybe it could be a shape that I created in my practice collage. Maybe it could be, I sort of like this little bumpy shape that looks like a little leaf. So I think that's the shape that I'm going to do today. So remember, when I'm making that small organic shape, I'm going to cut in, and then I'm just going to cut out that shape. I want to be careful not to cut off the edges of my paper. And I end up with my negative space, my hole that looks like my shape, and I end up with my shape. And I want to just keep doing that same kind of shape over and over. I notice in Matisse's work, a lot of times he likes to repeat the same kind of shape over and over. So I'm just going to take all of my papers and I'm going to cut out those weird wiggly shapes. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they should look similar. And I'm just going to make a pile of shapes and a pile of negative space shapes. And I'm going to continue to do that with all of my papers. Now, I probably don't need to use all of my papers. It's nice to have some extra in case I make a mistake. But once I have cut my shapes out, if you think back to the video that we watched about Matisse, the next important thing is to plan where you're going to put the shapes. I have just one more. So in my final artwork, I want to take these shapes and plan where I'm going to put them. It is important that I use at least one negative shape. I might want more, but I want to make sure I use at least one. And I can think about how I place those shapes. Do I want them in the corners? Do I want them overlapping? I want to make sure I balance my shapes, so I don't want to have all the positive shapes on one side and all the negative shapes on the other side. I want to make sure I spread those shapes out as I put them around. I could think about how I overlap them. It will definitely be too crowded if I try to put all of the shapes, and I don't want to cover up my people. So once I have, let me try a little smaller shape in there. Oh, I like that much better. So once I have the shapes where I want them, and I've experimented with where I'm putting them, I'm certain that I have some positive shapes and some negative shapes. My last step is, once I have my plan, I'm ready to glue. Just make sure when you glue that you twist the glue stick up. I have my plan. I'm simply going to take one shape, flip it over, put the glue stick on this side, then I pick it up, I flip it back over, and I push it down. And I want to continue doing that with all of my shapes. Remember, you always put the glue on the smaller shape and never on the background paper. When I'm all the way finished, I can go back and check my edges. If I still have a loose edge, I put the glue stick on it and I press it down. And you're going to keep going until all of your shapes are glued securely. When you're finished, don't forget to take the glue stick, twist it down just a little bit, and then put the lid on. I can't wait to see your final collages with your contrasting organic, positive, and negative shapes. And until next time, keep on creating.